Welcome back. It is the Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM, and it is time to check in with the Liberal Senator Alex Antic. Great to have you on, Senator. How are you?
Thanks. I'm really well, and good to be back with you. It's been a bit of a break, but great to be back in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a while since we last had you here on the Flow FM airwaves. Great to have you joining us, nonetheless. Now, Senator, I want to go straight to The Voice and where things stand with that currently. We've had a poll come out this morning, which tends to show that everyday Australians are becoming a little bit restless with where The Voice stands right now. Can you blame them?
No, look, I really can't. And I mean, I have to say I was always very hopeful that we would get to this point. I mean, this is not completely done and dusted yet by any stretch of the imagination, but the polls certainly show that Aussies are doing as I had hoped, and waking up is really a sort of a bigger issue, a more expansive issue than just sort of a line in a constitution that we're being told. I mean, we really haven't been told anything by the Albanese Labor government what's involved, but people are starting to unpack this and understand what's really, and understand that if it gets into the constitution, this stuff is permanent. It could affect everyday aspects of our lives, because, of course, the point is that it'll affect things that affect Indigenous people, and that could be anything. So I think Aussies are doing as we hoped and as we expected they would. They're unpacking this slowly in their own way, and I'm very hopeful that they're going to reject it.
Senator, how do you see this going from this point? Obviously, you would think that the proponents of The Voice, the federal government included, would be wanting to re-strategise. Do you see them becoming a little bit less emotive with how they're trying to communicate the pros of The Voice and becoming a bit more bigger on the details? Or how do you sort of see it going from this point on?
Well, look, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I think the strategy has been so nebulous start off with. I think this has been really a case of let's see if we can get this through on the field, if you like, and that strategy clearly has failed, because I think the government's underestimated people's ability to critically think on this stuff, and that's that is fairly telling. But look, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where you go from this. I mean, ultimately, I suspect if it goes down, the government will look to try and legislate, as they've done in the States. We had that quite recently in South Australia. There was a legislated version of this. So I suspect it'll head down that path if it fails, which I hope it will. The messaging, look, I think we saw a little bit of it last week in Parliament, where we had ministers from the government getting increasingly frustrated, starting to resort to name-calling in the chamber. And that tells you the story about this. I don't think any of them really understood how to sell this, because what they were selling was never going to be palatable to the Australian people. So, look, that's a matter for them. In the meantime, I just, continue to implore Aussies and South Australians, in particular, of course, on Flow here, to understand that this is permanent, to understand that it'll have far-reaching ramifications on their daily lives, potentially. And we saw the confusion in amongst the government ranks last week when one minister was saying one thing and another minister was saying another. I don't think any of them really understand where this heads.
And just going off the history, can we go much off history with referendums? I mean, going back in time, you would have to look at the fact that there doesn't seem to be a majority of support for this referendum. So therefore, you would think that, it's probably not going to go the way that the proponents want it to go. Do you feel as though because this is so divisive and it's, a very sort of modern time, that maybe we can't really look at the history, or how do you sort of look at that?
Well, I always think it's a brave person that bets against history, and I hope that's the case here. I mean, most referenda fail. It's as simple as that. Aussies are very cautious with their constitution, as they should be, and we see that all the way through, the most recent one being the Republic referendum, which was rightly rejected as well by the Australian people. So, look, I think we have to look to history on this, and that's encouraging for those of us that are supporting the no case, because it shows it's very, very difficult. Aussies know that this document has served us well over the years, and those of us that don't like mucking around with it, I think, have reason to be optimistic looking at the weight of history on this. They very, very rarely get up. And you've got to remember as well that when they have got up in the past, it's come after a lot of public discussion. If you go back to the actual original constitutional debates and conventions, they went on for weeks and months at the beginning of the birth of this document. We haven't had any of that. We've just been told to trust us, it's all going to be okay. And Aussies are throwing that out with the bathwater, I can tell you.
All right, Senator, I want to move on and talk about a different issue, and that is foreign investment into Australia. Now, it depends which way you look at this. It's either creeping into the country, or I guess if you're a fan of, people putting their money into Australian assets, then you're happy with the latest data that we've seen, which is that foreign investment has gone up to 4.60 trillion in 2022. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I'm always a bit divided on this, I have to say, because obviously we do need some of it. We do have a history with foreign investment, and it's been important to Australia's development. But I mean, obviously, I'd rather see Aussies investing overseas ultimately, and it's a bigger, broader picture. If we were in a position where we were properly using our natural resources without the handbrakes of the environmental regulations that are just crippling us now, and all the red tape and all the bureaucracy that we've got, then I would like to see us more on the opposite way. But that's not reality at the moment, and I think there's a realistic need for some foreign investment. Of course, that needs to be tempered with security and specific assets. I don't want to see a position where we're, obviously even going anywhere near strategic interests or farming properties or those sorts of things. We've seen a lot of that in the US with Chinese companies buying up property in the US, farming properties and those sorts of things. It's a really difficult balancing act, probably not one that we'd be able to summarise in a short amount of time here, but, it needs to be heavily regulated. And of course, the last government, the Liberal government, did a lot to protect from, strategic assets with the Foreign Investment Review Board having strengthened powers, and I think that was a really positive thing. But look, let's get back to making Australia a power again by doing what we do best, and that is using our natural resources, building wealth in this country. And I'd love to see Aussies investing overseas, frankly, and in Australia. But here we are in the real world.
I think many people are going to agree with you on that one. And just speaking about overseas, talking about gender identities, I know this is a big talking point right now in the media and the general conversation that we're having in Australia and around the world. I think the position of most Australians would be one which is similar to people can identify any way they please, Senator, but it is not the job of teachers to be pushing any sort of beliefs onto young kids when it comes to this sort of topic. We did see that in the UK. We saw an example of some 13-year-old girls recording a very heated conversation they were having with their teacher, where their teacher was basically reprimanding them for questioning the identity of, clearly what was a female sex, but a female student who was choosing to identify as a cat. So, I mean, it's all getting a little bit ridiculous, really. So do you feel as though we should be fairly alarmed by this?
Yeah, well, I think the creep is on. I think we should. I mean, one of my great hopes is that we can make some inroads back into the education system. I think what you've basically described is the model of the state taking responsibility for parenting, in a sort of a small nutshell. And that's wrong. Parents need to have, full and absolute control over their kids, what they're being, how they're being disciplined, and so on and so forth. So I'm really, an advocate for parental rights in this space. I am worried about the stuff that's creeping into the syllabus. Focus for me, obviously at federal level, there's only so many things that can be done. But we are seeing this creep on. We are sort of seeing this, infection coming from the United States and the United Kingdom, where this kind of radical gender theory has crept into the classroom. And my concern is that parents don't even know about it half the time. One of the things that I'm really keen on exploring is ways in which parents can be more across the syllabus, what's going on, the programs that are being brought into the schools. A lot of this stuff comes in through, outside consultants who might talk about, consent and those sorts of things. And sometimes it's wrapped up in a bigger, broader message of gender ideology. So, look, I think there's a long way to go, but ultimately parents need to be across what kids are being taught in the schools. It might mean talking to the principals. It might mean talking to the teachers and being comfortable with all of that. I think there is a long way to go in this country. I don't think we've quite reached the levels of what we've seen out of the UK and the US, but we've got to be really careful with this. This is kids of the future, and we can't have them being confused and indoctrinated with this stuff. And of course, I say that, with the point in mind that we need to always be concerned and respectful for kids that are struggling with gender identity, of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
Well, Nigel Farage is a man you know very well, and he spoke quite eloquently on this subject last week. And you're going to be linking up with him and also Donald Trump Jr. at this conference next month. So just profile this event for our listeners and how they can get involved, Senator.
Yeah, well, it's going to be an interesting one. It's unfortunately not coming through Adelaide. I don't think there was a venue that would host it or could host it or had the space to host it, unfortunately. And I know the people involved in promoting it were looking to do that maybe next time. Certainly, I know Nigel's keen to come back to South Australia. He's a fan of wine regions, and I think would love to come and visit the Barossa and McLaren Vale and all those sorts of things. But really, the message is one of interest, I think, in terms of the sort of experiences that have happened in the US and in the UK. And the interest point for me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to be involved, were the correlations between what we saw with the election of Donald Jr.'s father in the US in 2016 and the Brexit movement in the case of Nigel, and how that overlays in relation to the voice. I think there are actually a lot of similarities in the dynamic, the political dynamic. That is, we saw the establishment in both cases pushing a very different message to what was ultimately determined by the people. I think the everyday people in the case of the Trump election and in the case of Brexit rejected that which corporations and the establishment were trying to push upon them. And I think it's going to be interesting to see their views on that and how that overlays onto the voice. I was simply just asked to tag along. I'm very much a tag along event, to tack on the end of the billing, but it's going to be an interesting few presentations in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. I think the 9th, 10th, and 11th. I think of next month. Look at Google Trump Jr. .com.au, I think, and there is sort of information there about that. But it'd be a very interesting experience, I have to say. I'm interested to hear what these guys have got to say about their own experiences in a similar but different environment politically.
Great stuff. And just to finish on, Senator, the Based podcast is certainly cutting up some very addictive stuff on your social media. So just tell us more about the Based podcast. Yeah, well, look, you can go and have a look at it. It's on Spotify and on Apple Podcast, YouTube, I think, as well, subject to some of the content, which obviously sometimes Apple will put on and Spotify will put on and YouTube won't. But we're broadening it across various different platforms. Basically, the feeling was that, in this privileged role as a senator, you get the opportunity to interact with interesting people. And I think it's really important to be communicating around the mainstream media and giving people the opportunity to hear from interesting people, as if you were sitting in my office listening to them talking to you. So we just had Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister, on the podcast, and that was a really interesting discussion. We had British cardiologist Asim Malhotra and Nikolai Petrovsky, Professor Nikolai Petrovsky, who's a maker of vaccines, and we've had a whole host of others coming up that are just interesting people, political discussions, talking about relevant issues to the political cycle. And this is an interesting insight. I think if you're in the privileged position of having this role, why not give people the opportunity to sort of see what you're talking to people about and see it in podcast format. They're not long forms. They're usually sort of half hour, 45 minutes, but it's been a really interesting experience, going really well. I think it's really important in terms of the political discourse to get that message out there a different way. We all should be doing it. Great to get the insights and thoughts of Federal Liberal Senator Alex Antic on Fly FM today. Really appreciate it, Senator, and all the best with everything going forward. We'll speak to you again soon. We will speak to you again soon. Thanks again.